In our everyday lives, we are classified constantly by ourselves, our peers, authorities, technologies, various cultures and ideological frameworks, and the very backbones of our societies. Classification systems are relics of past cultures transported into a modern framework. It is no surprise they are generally quite problematic and altogether dated. Typically, we might classify ourselves a bit differently, or at least with different language, than others would classify us. For classification systems to be corrected, we need ample representation within the corporate world. And for that, we must address the systemic oppression that birthed the original classifications. One way to start is to feed the algorithm. It is vital that we realize who the intended audience is when parsing through search results, data, and other information. For people of color searching medical symptoms, the intended audience is clear, not them. Medical students and medical illustrators are tackling the issue by working together to create new content relevant to the BIPOC community. Malone Mukwende is a medical student in London. After unsuccessfully Googling medical symptoms on darker skin, he decided to be proactive about the lack of information. Working with professors, together they literally wrote the book on clinical diagnosis on more melanated skin tones, including photos and updated terminology. What's astounding is that they've decided to make the project a living document that may be continually updated and revised with the help of the open source public. That project is called Mind the Gap, a play on the common London underground phrase and the evident gap in clinical reference photos for patients of color. As they work on SEO, their data points should begin populating Google searches, although, admittedly, I had to search for a few minutes before I came across the book Mind the Gap, since there are so many other things with that name or included phrase. When Googling rash, I came across exactly 3 examples of melanated skin tones. Googling rash on black, face, person, skin, etc., turns out much more relevant results, but it should not be ignored here that white skin was the default search result. The same was true for other skin related search terms such as cradle cap, hives, psoriasis, and eczema. Edema as a search term had a marginally higher percentage of people of color as examples, as did sprained ankle and pregnant woman. However, search terms related to dislocated XYZ tended to yield 1 to 2 people of color at the top of the results, with the remainder being white. It should be likewise noted that Mukwende's book, site, or community are not prevalent within search results, even when specifying on black skin. I even tried searching acne on black skin, something that I know his site references multiple times, and still did not populate his content. Unfortunately, Mukwende and his team of professors and co-publishers clearly need to do more search engine optimization, or SEO. Google is not, however, blameless. More than simply aggregating material relevant to the masses or even the majority, many of these corporations reflect the values of an elite subset of individuals. It is not dissimilar to a royal family making laws that benefit their personal lives with the naive assumption that the populace will likewise benefit. It's a blindness, in a manner of speaking, to differing needs. Let them eat cake, if you will. This is where proper representation comes into play. If Silicon Valley wasn't so stuck on the fallacy of meritocracy, perhaps it could recognize the disparity between census data in and out of their companies. If systemic oppression had been less systemic, if CEOs had broken the cycle, if legislation had forced their hands, would these disparities be so glaring? The evidence says they would not. Proper representation of all races, genders, and creeds is required for cohesive leadership both in our governments and in our corporations. Amarachi Ori of CNN wrote, "Studies have shown this lack of diversity." A 2014 study by researchers at the University of Wollongong in Australia examined gender bias in anatomy textbooks and found that of more than 6,000 images with an identifiable sex published between 2008 and 2013 in 17 textbooks, the vast majority were white and just over a third were female. About 3% showed disabled bodies and only 2% featured elderly people. Shortly after his project took off, Mukwende was contacted by a medical student in Zimbabwe who illuminated that the discrepancy was not simply a European one. Old, unwanted textbooks from the Western world were being shipped to Africa for reuse. Zimbabwe, a predominantly black nation, had nothing but pale skinned reference photos. In an interview with Angelina Jolie, she confided in Makwende that her Ethiopian adopted daughter had recently undergone surgery, after which the doctors requested that she contact them, quote, if her daughter's skin turned pink. Makwende acknowledged that this was the sort of potentially fatal discrepancy he first noticed in his studies. A mother less aware and more trusting likely would not know when her daughter's doctor ought to be notified, given the unlikelihood of the skin turning pink. In November of 2021, Chidebere Ibe published a medical illustration of a black fetus in the womb. It rapidly took the internet by storm, with many users, even those in the medical field for decades, claiming to have never seen such an image. Having only been in the field a little over a year, his work immediately began inspiring others more than he could have imagined. Parents called him, saying their young child of color now believed they could go into the medical field. Others called him, thanking him profusely, as they had never seen a medical illustration they could relate to. Others, like Hillary Wilson, sought to follow in his footsteps, and indeed she has. Wilson's work has been published by the likes of PBS, the New York Times, the Johns Hopkins Center for Transgender Youth, and Melologic, an incredible, interactive site allowing users to search specific skin conditions on specific skin tones. Last year, eBay was invited by Makwende to participate in the second edition of Mind the Gap. It seems the pair may be able to help each other realize their dreams and goals. Makwende, of an open dialogue and knowledge base for patients of color, and eBay, of a coalition of black medical illustrators paving the way for him to progress into neurosurgery. Both are cognizant of the barriers they face if this basic agreement to reliable information cannot be met. Both are intent on altering the dialogue and shepherding others to their cause. Only time will bear the fruits of their labors.